Hey, I'm James Santiago, and we're gonna spend the day getting tones out of Enigmatic. I've got David Ryan Harris, Joey Landreth, Tim Pierce, three of the best here. They've never played together. We've never shared tone secrets. We're gonna trade guitars, we're gonna tell stories, we're gonna hopefully find some sounds that I think are gonna be unique to each player and have a little jam later, so stick with us. Everyone, I'm sitting here with Tim Pierce, and we're going to deconstruct his Overdrive Special tone. But it might be worth noting you've basically probably used every amp under the sun here. You've been in LA a long time where, you know, every flavor of amp has been used on all these recordings. But we should probably rewind back to where you started at, because you weren't originally an Overdrive Special user back then, right?
No. When I started recording, we were using Marshalls and Fenders. Lots of different versions of those. There weren't a lot of boutique amps around. And then the obsession started in the late 80s and the 90s with boutique amps. And at that point, the D-style amp was kind of diminishing in popularity for a couple of reasons. First of all, they were so hard to get. They took so long to make, and they were so expensive. So we were chasing all these other brands, you know, Soldano, Bogner.
Which you've had. You had one of the early
Oh,
Soldanos,
yeah.
right?
And they were easy to get. There was they were more in production. Boogie, VHT, all of that stuff. Yeah. Now, fast forward to now, and I appreciate this sound more than any other sound there is, just because of the touch sensitivity. And I had one of these amps, a real one, a few weeks ago, made a video about it, and now I'm chasing this tone all the time.
Right.
And you guys kind of did it. You kind of put it in here. And for me, it's all about touch sensitivity. But back then, they were hard to get, and the era was kind of being surpassed by this obsession with high gain and all these other great boutique amps. So I never had one of the originals, but now I want the sound more than anything.
Right. And you getting to spend some time with an older unit.
Yeah,
I think
ideal.
It's great, but I should also worth stating that when you get one of those amps, they already are what they are. They have whoever's previous mods that he would have done for them, and not everyone might buy. So I'm glad you found one that actually spoke to you, because again, you can't go in there and change it yourself. But we're going to do that here by making the one that you likely were bonding with. So I think we're going to go into the app a little bit and show what you liked about the amp and reference what we did in Enigmatic to get there.
Yeah, and for me, it's touch sensitivity. I like to play guitar like I'm a vocalist. I like to use punctuation. I like to have different levels of loud and soft, of clean and dirty, and I like to get all of that with my pick, and that's the sound we're getting.
Well, let's try this. If you don't mind, why don't we kill the reverb and delay, which makes it record quality, but the amp sound itself, and then maybe just show how you were dynamically hitting it. So
absolutely, yeah.
So I'm going to kill our delay and reverb here, and let's just see when you're doing this, like what you tried to play for me when we were doing
Well, let me preface, this is the Overdrive channel, right?
That is right.
And that's on for a reason, because I want to get as distorted as I can with hard picking, and maybe the bridge pickup, and then as clean as I can with soft picking and the neck pickup. And we could have a cleaner setting on this, but we're not, just for purposes of this demonstration. Because if I want to pick soft and play clean, I'm on the neck pickup. I'm picking softly, and I have it turned down. Now, for a contrast, I want to be able to do this. And that's one sound.
Right.
So I'm getting everything. That's what I seek these days. I seek the ability to get every level of clean and dirty, soft and loud, with the amp set in one spot, with one thing that I don't have to change over here, and that way I can do it all with the guitar and my pick. And so even with the bridge pickup, to me, that's the whole ball game.
Right.
You know, and we did it.
We did it. Now, there are some things that you asked for. I think it's worth tearing that apart now. I think one of the things is that you layer these gain stages. There's a little bit of gain in the front of the amp from the input, but you are also big on getting the power amp, basically the volume of the amp, up to where the power tubes were doing something, which probably comes from you liking Marshalls back in the day when you just turned the whole thing up and you got some grit. And that has a thing to it, but the fact that we're layering that, so the Dumbo having that more creative front end, but then getting that power amp to sometimes I call it Bonamassa level. Because Joe plays really loud. He loves to get the tubes cooking in the back end, and anyone who loves old amps, that was the only way to do it back then. So meeting in the middle of the high-tech front end with the back. So if I look here, let me start from the bottom up.
Okay.
You'll notice our master gain is up above halfway. So that would be the equivalent of Overdrive Special of really being like at 6 already.
Okay.
Let's do this. I love reverb, so just a little bit of splash to get the tails.
We've earned it.
We've earned it. Just a little bit of that. Now I'm going to pull the master volume down and we'll show how much of that grit's coming from the back end.
Oh yeah, that's the sweet spot right there.
Interestingly enough, when I turned it down, we lost a little output volume, but you also hear a little bit of that harmonic sizzle go away.
Truth.
It starts to become more what you live through is having like preamps in a rack.
Right.
And having a flat, clean power amp. What we're not doing, we're getting a little bit of that sort of weight and harmonic content from that power section. So I like it in the same spot.
Yes.
I like it to do something.
Yeah.
So yeah, so again, if we did it too much, you'll hear it go over the top.
It gets a little too fuzzy,
Right.
and a little undefined.
It kind of goes in, kind of implodes inward and doesn't
Collapses a little bit,
Yeah.
which any amp does. Every amp does that. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. You always find the spot right before the amp starts to kind of set down a little bit, and that's what you've done right there. It's on about 6, right?
About 6, yeah. I'll do it again. I'll come up to it and then hit your playing and then tell me when to stop.
So that it has size, it's blossoming, it's opening up, but it's as big as it can be before it kind of starts to shut down on itself, just like any other amp.
Perfect. And sometimes the way we explain this is, you know, it's doing a little part, and doing this in little bits gives you a sort of distortion tone that's not one-dimensional.
Yes.
You know, if we get it all from one source, it's going to be the same little harmonic series where you're getting a little preamp, you're getting a little the power tubes, and it fills in that gap. I've had a few friends that like you really hear, it sounds like high end, but it really is extra kind of content notes up there that kind of pop out more. Now, so we're going to go from the back end up. So the other thing we did, which is kind of crucial for the overdrive, is added the HRM circuit.
Right.
And it's very likely that the amp you had already had the HRM in it.
I found out that it was. I didn't know at first. I asked the owners, and they confirmed it was the HRM circuit.
Okay.
And I love it.
Awesome. So what I'll do is,
Yeah.
we have HRM in here, but I'm going to turn off that circuit. And just to explain it, all it is a very specific treble middle bass circuit that only lives on the overdrive. So it's one of those things where maybe you want to add a little bass and a little mid-range, but if you do it on the tone controls of the pedal, that is before the distortion circuit, and that can change the way it distorts. Because if you add mid-range, you actually just get more distortion on things. So we don't want to change the way it's distorting and feeling. We just want to have a clean, transparent way to add a little bottom and a little mid-range to cut, almost like you're at the console a little bit. So I'm going to turn off HRM. So if I turn this off, and then I'll re-engage it. So here it is off. And then engaged.
Okay, like for single line stuff, this is really going to show.
And then we'll take it back out.
Both sound great, but for soloing, there is a creamy, warm nature to having the HRM on.
And then on.
Just better for soloing.
Yeah. What's interesting is I hear it being the same on both, but you just sound a little fuller and almost mastered on the other one.
Well, it affects the way you play. I would play differently with that off. And I really like it on for solo voicing.
And it's worth noting that even if I'd put all of those down the center, just by turning that on, it has a sound of its own. So if you look at your settings, we left the bass where it was because just by enabling that circuit, it already adds a little heft. But we pushed you a little mid forward and took a little bit of the high end to just kind of round it off. And again, not much, but it makes a big difference because it allows you to keep your other kind of clean sound and the way you got to the distortion circuit intact. And one other thing to note too, which we're going to go up the circuit path again, the OD trim. Now, the way you set this up, you do not run the input very low either. You actually like to hit the front end a little harder too.
Yeah, I do.
So that's one thing that the OD trim takes care of is on your pedal, you can see we're sort of in this sort of 2 o'clock zone, which with humbuckers is already going to get a little edge of breakup, as the classic term is. And what we want to do is make sure we don't hit that overdrive circuit too hard. So that's why on your setup, we pulled the OD trim down, allowing you to hit the front end a little harder,
I see that.
but not pushing the OD neck circuit so hard that, again, it collapses.
Yeah, right.
And I'll show that. If I push this up, now we're going to collapse the neck circuit that, again, collapses the master volume power tube circuit.
Not a bad sound, but it is fuzzing out a little bit,
Yeah.
losing definition,
Yep.
losing...
So I'll pull it back.
That's the right spot.
That's the right spot. Now, these are things you would have done if you had made an amp custom with the man himself.
Yeah.
And you would have taken this guitar, and that amp would have been torn apart, and you would have been tweaking stuff. Again, what's going to make this something that works for your hands, and it's going to be unique to you, because I guarantee you if I play it, I'm not going to sound that good.
It'll sound
I'm not going to
different.
sound like your hands.
Yeah.
Because I play with different pressure and do things differently. So the next thing up the tone stack was you like the Skyline, which again, from the year that amp was probably made, is what he thought was a sort of upgraded EQ section. And we called it classic in here. That would have been the earlier Santa Cruz model. When you get the Skyline, that's that era where you had like a presence control, master volume. Some of the amps had a mid-range instead of deep control at that point.
Well, are we in the era of Carlton and Robin Ford?
100%.
Yeah, see, that's what I heard those records, and it sunk in,
Yeah.
and that's the tone I love. And the real amp I had a few weeks ago was apparently made for Larry Carlton. They couldn't completely verify that. I mean, it ended up in Santana's hands, and he was the current owner, but it might have been made for Larry Carlton. And the minute I turned it on, it was like, oh, this is right for me too.
I bet. I guarantee it probably was, because you have this same sort of way you speak through the notes like Larry does, which is very difficult to do. Play few notes with more impact, with more dynamics, the way the pick hits the strings, how hard you hit the string, how you let it sustain out. You know, that's an art. And Larry being the type of person who started on actually that back there was straight up 50s Tweed Deluxe. You put that on 10, the only thing you had left was your dynamics. Yeah. Rolling the volume down, playing lighter. The pick. And if you learn it that way, you need an amp that supports you like that. So it makes sense to me. So let's keep going up the tone stack. And you actually prefer the jazz.
Okay, so I had the amp in my hands, and I loved putting it on the jazz setting and just turning the volume up to about 7, to where it had that edge of breakup, but not too much distortion at the beginning. And then when I turn on the overdrive channel, it's never too fuzzy, never too undefined. So it's what you were saying. I would never compromise that first stage. And I would go to the rock setting and go, I can get rock out of my hands, I can get out of the overdrive channel. I'd like for this to be edge of breakup, because I do so much of my life in in that zone where, you know, it's clean and dirty just by how I pick and you know, if the chords are big or small, if it's single notes. So it's really kind of crazy. It surprises me, but I like the jazz setting, which is the cleanest setting,
Right.
as a basis for my rock sounds from this style of amp.
And we might as well go there. If you don't mind playing this, and then we'll flow in and rock. But again, we'll probably hear
Yeah.
it kind of crash a little
Okay.
bit. But and then rock mode.
It's fine.
It's still fun, but there's a little bit of the subtleties that kind of go away.
Yeah, yeah.
I heard more definition in your recording when
Yeah.
it wasn't in rock mode.
Yeah.
But you were playing rock stuff in
Yeah.
jazz mode.
Yeah, it's
Which
fine.
means there's no rules. Who cares,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's just whatever, I can get more personality from my pick and do more shadings of clean and dirty and everything in between if I use the jazz setting. And it's a subtle thing. It's just a little more clear.
Wow. So I'm learning from you is I always throw it in rock mode, push everything to the front.
Crazy, huh?
And but I also, you know, and again, I think the guitars we're playing, you have humbuckers, but those are more PAF, not very loud, but
Yeah,
a little
right.
beefier than what I would have here in
Yeah.
a single coil. So going up from there, important to note, you do have a little bright cap going on.
Okay.
And if we explain that, the way these bright caps work in these amps is the higher the volume is, the less effect the bright cap actually has. So if you turn the amp really clean and you turn on a bright cap, it's like razor blades. It's a lot, and a lot of people don't use it. They just turn it off, but keep the amp really clean. As we turn that volume up, that cap gets dialed out. So sometimes you need a bigger, brighter value because you're pushing it so hard.
Well, and my clean sounds are always dirty. You just don't know it.
Right.
I mean, a totally clean sound, I respect that. There are players who spend their lives just with totally clean sounds. My clean sounds are just me picking softly on a dirty sound, or me getting enough gain to where the notes compress and have sustain, but still read as clean. My clean sounds are actually dirty.
And
So that makes sense.
it
That I
makes
can use
sense.
that.
You can use that because
Yeah.
we're pushing it up a little higher. And again, it's one of the reasons why there are multiple bright cap options.
Right.
And we won't bore everyone with listening to bright caps, but it's one of the things you'd experiment with kind of once you've done all this gain staging, then go, well, do I need a little extra tiny cut at the top of the note, which is all we really dialed in for you.
Yeah.
Just that little bit. So going way to the top, again, normal input, we didn't need any more boosting, so we skipped the FET input.
That's the other thing. I liked the FET, but I also like the normal one just because then I have more control. I don't need to actually overload it at the very beginning. We can do that later.
Because you got, on the back end, you're already getting that harmonic content where everyone runs that clean.
Yeah.
Turns on the FET and gets a little extra high end in.
And we haven't even talked about turning on a pedal in front of it.
Exactly.
So there's so many options when you do that too. It's one pedal even.
One pedal, one basic
Boost pedal or drive pedal or
a,
clean boost
a
or
Nobles or a tube screamer or a tube, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we're going to get to the very top here, which is pretty important, which is where do you start? So if I show the expanded list here, and we did listen to all these, you ended up on a sort of stiff power supply. It wasn't that squishy as we listened here, but it makes sense because you're already kind of pushing the power section on the back end with the master volume.
Well, it's the one I had. I found out it was this one, which is the
High plate.
high plate 100 watt. So I think I'm going to stick with that. I like 100 watt amps because there's just a little more thump in the bottom end, you know, when I play the low notes. And I can really, really hear it. I like all of these settings. And I think the squishy one I really like too.
Well, why don't we try it? I'm going to throw. Let's play again on what you use, and then I'll flip it to the low plate squishy one.
Yeah.
And so everyone can hear it. So. And now low plate.
A little softer.
It's softer.
Yeah.
It's kind of doing a little extra sort of
Yeah.
inside thing. So if we go the complete opposite, let's go to the very stiff but low plate, which should be night and day different from this one. So.
makes me feel like I'm playing a little cleaner sound.
Yeah.
A little less forgiving, if you want to use that word.
Yeah. And I should say this, I played a number of dumbbells back in the day that were very much this type, and I had a hard time with them.
People talk about that.
It's like, I do not bond with you at all.
Yeah, people.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk about that.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, you don't do what I want. And again, you have to be able to get a few of them to know, and be lucky enough to have had years of finding one or letting a friend borrow one, or you get one from somebody else. But you can just do this experiment yourself, and it is worth doing for a couple of minutes just to see how your hands feel.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to go back to yours. And the last experiment I'd like to show you is the way we tuned it for this guitar. So if I think of historically the two pickup types, this is the classic PAF humbucker, and these are 60s Fender Strat coil pickups, sort of the standard if you were a Stevie Ray or even a John Mayer tape. You'd want this sort of 60s pickup sound. So the trick being, if I give you a different guitar, just how clean your sounds are actually.
Yeah.
Just by luring it. So here.
Let's do it.
And there you go.
I'm still happy.
You just did something very important, which you told me you do like to make sure the neck pickup is ready for a solo. You can still cut and do a solo on the neck.
Yeah, I mean, that's, this, just, the Hendrix thing. I mean, this is great for parts. All the other pickup choices are great for parts. But the neck for soloing.
Amazing. So one thing you did for us was you brought us a track you had.
Yeah.
So I think we get to hear your sort of clearly defined studio sound with an Overdrive Special on a track you would typically play this over.
Yeah, and I'll get this thing back in my hands for that. But the point I really want to make, the overall point with this, is you've made an amp here. I never once during this conversation assumed that we weren't playing through an amp. Okay, so that's kind of astounding that you've taken it that far. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we were playing through an amp from the era.
When you mention that, it is interesting that we are in the room where I had all the Overdrive Specials, and I needed to have that experience you had, but with a switcher where I was going back and forth between the real things, loud, and this. And we are not complete until I get confused, which is a weird thing to say, that my confusion means we're done. But I have to become the player at that point. I have to stop scientifically nitpicking it and grab any one of these, 335 Strats, Tellys, Alpha, whatever, sit, play, and go, oh, no, there, I can feel it. There's something not right there. Until I can go back and forth playing and not stop. If I can sit and enjoy it and turn off the work brain and go, oh, no, I'm just playing it, that's when we're done. And the work that this team does to make that happen for me, which my man Ross Dunkel did a lot of this, or did all of this crazy work. We tore apart all of these famous overdrive circuits and amps. And the fact that it's doing what I hoped it would brings me a lot of joy, because I love these amps. I love very specific versions of these amps, and I have it all there. So selfishly, I'm happy to have it in there, and I'm glad to have you over playing, doing this for us.
Well, it's a tool that I need, and it's just great that it's so easy and so convenient and so affordable compared to the the price of a real one right now.
All right, so we switch guitars, which I love your guitar, by the way. Thank you.
It's very much like yours, but that's another story.
That's after. The
synchronicity.
You brought a track for us because I think the sound you designed really does speak as again, talking about the way a vocal can carry a song.
Right.
The way you play dynamically, we're going to get to hear you do that. So thank you for coming, and let's hear you.
Cool.
Nailed it. Tim, thanks for coming over here. And I love that you're coming to a space actually where your career started, funny enough.
So true. Some of these multi-tracks that you're going through, these big boxes with the big tapes, have me on a few of them. So.
Have some of your very first session, maybe your first official recording session was
Just
done
about.
in this.
Yeah.
So it's always a pleasure to have you back here. I'm lucky to be here and get to see you and call you a friend and steal all your riffs.
Well, thanks for making this thing that sounds so amazing. It's a great tool.
Hey everybody, I'm sitting with David Ryan Harris, and we're going to break down what makes a great sound for his guitar playing, which is kind of everything at this point. We dialed in.
I think so.
Yeah, and funny enough, I'm saying that joke, but I kind of mean it because we did a quick startup, just trying to figure out what would work for you, and it was pretty easy to find where you live at, which is this, in like a Tim Pierce case, a very dynamic thing. But you're doing it dynamically too, because you're also a lot of times singing. You're coming in and out with your vocal dynamics, your guitar playing dynamics, supporting the song.
Yep.
But being up front, because the sound you have is, and we're going to show this in the way you lay out your pedals. The way you use the reverb and treble is dynamic because it's hitting the amp and it's exploding, but then it's also pulling back.
Right.
So it's a very unique, almost old school meets new school way of doing that. So I'd love to break down how we get there.
I mean, I'm a songwriter's guitar player. And a lot of times, especially like recently, I've been doing a lot of sort of solo stuff. And as opposed to playing like solo acoustic, I've been doing like a lot of solo electric. So like dynamics and being able to work with sort of like shadows and light and like a little dirty here, a little, little verb here, and like being able to push in and out of an amp or reverb is like really important to kind of keep things interesting and to, really feel like I'm shading and lighting. So something that's dynamic on the amp front is really important.
Now, where did you fall as far as like the actual amp itself? Is there a specific era and vibe of an amp? Are you the type that, if you give me any old deluxe reverb, that works? Or was there something a lot more specific for you?
I always loved the super reverb, like a 60, you know.
Oh, man. 410s.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite amps that I had was I actually had a 410 matchless.
Oh, yeah.
I had to sell it when we first moved to LA because I ran out of money, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was worth. And eventually, I met Mark, and I talked to him about the amp, and he told me there were only 4 of them ever made, and 2 of them went to Jimmy Vaughn. And I think I sold it for very little money, but. So yeah, I really like the sound of 410s because they're sort of punchy.
Yep.
Still retains a little bit of low end and that sort of. I'm not usually a fan of like the EL84s because it's a little glassy for me, but I really love the sound of the 410 stuff.
Yeah, interesting. You said matchless because I think of Mark's history with repairing boxes and starting matchless, and that EL84 34 thing, but then the super reverb thing with the 10s, which is a funny story. I don't have a super reverb anymore because. When I got married, I had to sell it to buy a refrigerator.
Yeah.
And Carlos Santana still has it. I can't get it back from him.
Yeah.
But that's the only one I have, so I'm kind of still got to stick in the mud for getting a super again.
Yeah.
But your playing definitely has a little bit of that. I can see where you know how to use a tank, like a spring tank,
right,
and an amp turned up. And the way, for some people, they get distorted and they don't like that, but you're actually able to use it musically.
Right.
And you can see in the way we've set this up, your pedal board is showing that we put something like this Delver, which would typically be put after. We've got it in front on a spring setting and in the tremolo. When I was growing up, we used to actually have those little brown Fender tanks.
Yes.
So then letting that splat in front of an amp. But we're just doing it in sort of a high-tech fashion. So also another thing is the guitar you're playing.
Yes.
So it's kind of a P90. Are these still single coils?
Yeah, still single coils. Playing with John, he obviously does the Strat thing. So I need something that's complementary to a Strat, but it's not a Strat. So that's kind of like the where I started kind of messing around with sort of all sorts of things. I have like a SG Melody Maker, which is also sort of a single coil, but I found that to be a little thin. And so the P90s in this is really great, and it having the semi-hollow thing gets a little air around the tone. So when I'm doing the solo stuff, it's really great. It kind of bridges the gap between acoustic and electric.
Awesome. Well, if you don't mind, let's dig into a little bit of what works for your playing style. And what I'll do is maybe we can start, we'll turn off the reverb and the trim and just work with the basic amp. And if you don't mind, show me like the things you do to find that. Because we got a basic sound up and running. And let's see if we can't fine tune this and figure out how we got here.
Great.
All right. So here. Oh, that's off already. And we do have a fuzz face, which we're going to turn on later. So what we have here, and we kind of found for your playing style was, again, working from the bottom up. The master's up, but it's not too up, so we're definitely getting a little power tube sag when you're hitting it. So if you play it now, we've got kind of a clean sound. So oddly enough, too, we pulled your input down, but we are in the rock mode. And for referencing this, Pierce had humbuckers, but went in jazz mode because he wanted to hit the front end, but again, not so hard that it's all distortion all the time.
Right.
So it kind of makes sense that you've got even probably less output of the guitar, so we're able to go into rock mode and pull that volume down. So we're getting a little juice from the front end of the amp. So just to try it, if I put you in jazz mode, it's probably going to get really clean. So let me pull this back. So here's the jazz input. It's nice, but when you're hitting that string, I'm not hearing that growl when you were.
Yeah, I'm not interacting.
Yeah, so let's try it again. So here's just moving that to the rock tone style.
Way more fun to play.
Way more fun. All right, cool. And I'm digging that. Now, we also have one other thing. We're not using any overdrive right now.
Right.
We're not going to do that at the moment. And we also do have a little bright cap in. Now, we could play with that, and maybe it's worth showing what the difference in the bright cap will be doing. Since you do have a volume that's about halfway up, the bright cap will make a difference. So that you get to that by going into alt mode. And when you turn this dial, the treble, underneath that are different bright caps. So if I turn this off, so here's nothing.
All right. Okay.
It's already. Here's your first option. Here's the second option. That works, but now here's one. Oh, this is going to be double what that is. Here's the third.
Great.
What bonded with you better? Of
I
the
mean,
three?
Oddly enough, I tend to roll the tone off on my guitar a lot.
Ah, okay.
So the fact that I could get there really quickly with the first was really attractive to me, although it was a little dark. But
Right.
I liked that I could get there so quickly because it was still really musical.
Yeah.
So I think somewhere in the middle is
in the
probably
middle.
best for me.
So that's kind of where I was feeling too. I could hear your strings a little better.
Yeah.
And now here's one thing. If we're going to talk about setups with like a super, and I got into supers because of Stevie Ray, and he did fuzz phases and tube screamers. The funny thing is the bright cap does a little bit on your clean, but the minute you hit it with a pedal in front, then you really hear how much that high end kind of screws with you.
Gotcha.
So, because you like fuzzes and I like fuzzes,
Yeah.
we have this old 66 original fuzz face, and we'll hear the no bright cap and then the bright cap on, and we'll see how it affects your pedals in front. Because the one thing about our special is really good at taking pedals in the front end.
Right.
And since right now we're doing a spring in front, we're doing trem in front, let's just go there. So here is the fuzz with no bright cap. And then we'll turn on the bright cap we liked. There you go. Okay, that works for the fuzz too.
Yeah.
That actually worked out all right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Man, that's great.
Now we're gonna have some. Now let's go ahead and hit it with the reverb. So now we're hitting the fuzz. We're gonna smack the reverb tank and then hit the front end of the amp. And this should bloom hopefully in the right way.
It's pretty great.
So one thing I think the sound you naturally like, you already play dynamically and you pull the volume down. So with the fuzz and that, we should be able to get your volume down and clean up pretty
Clean it
well.
up. It's pretty great.
Well, that's working too easy already. So somehow it's actually working. Perfect. Again, now we're still using an amp that is kind of on the edge of breakup, but it's still getting clean. So the fuzz is working. Somebody gave me a tube screamer and I ran into a super clean twin reverb. And I'm like, this isn't enough distortion. And they go, hey, dummy, the amp actually has to be distorting already.
A little bit distorted.
Yeah, and then you do this layering thing, then it all made sense. And this is one of those scenarios too, is even just a little boost or a little fuzz hitting that front end is, I'm guessing, probably more than enough for your leads, or do you really use distortion? Because it seems like you're more overdrive, boost to make it happen.
In this phase of my life and career, sure. I'm not super overdriven, super overdriven. Your instincts are correct, sir.
Now, going through your back catalog, when you did that first record for Columbia,
Yeah.
did you have a different sense of where your guitar tone was then?
Oh, for sure.
So what was your default then?
Oh, it actually wasn't as pedal heavy.
Oh.
It was taking a 50-watt Marshall kind of dimed.
Which is still lethal.
Yeah, yeah,
That's still a lot.
yeah.
Oh, okay, funny because Tim had the same experience where he got started on Marshalls, turned up on very loud.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. So when did you start to veer off that? Like, what was the first amp that, like you said, the Matches was again more of a clean amp turned up, and was it gig specific when you started playing for other folks, going, well, I need a different palette, or were you changing like your songwriting style?
I think just trying to be more consistent with tones, because you can't always, and then also just being a bit more cognizant of stage volume.
Wow.
And you just can't do that every night. And I think a lot of times, although I know that the settings are the same on the amp, power's different, and I just found it was a lot easier to get a kind of baseline tone with a fairly clean amp, and then to juice it with distortion with pedals. So that was, and also I just didn't want to be so loud.
Oh, well,
I got old.
There's a situation, a lot of my friends who play for singers, who are the guitar players who need the amp loud, usually get told to turn down really fast.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you do is tell the artist who's the singer that, well, my tone's so important, it needs to be louder than your vocal mic. That doesn't fly very long.
Right, right.
And I think that happened with these sort of Overdrive specials, having a master vom where you can at least get some distortion and gain in color,
Right.
Without the amp being that loud.
Right.
And then again, you being primarily a songwriter and great singer, by the way, and great songwriter. You're fighting a little losing battle in your head
It's
about
me.
my tone
Yeah,
and my
exactly.
singing.
Yes.
Who wins?
Yeah. I mean, the singing's got to win for me.
Good.
I'm a singer that plays guitar, not a guitar player that sings.
And I have a few other friends that do this are also singers in the band, and as important as the guitarist to them, once they start singing, like, well, that needs to change.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
Because if you can't hear the song, then why are you playing guitar?
For sure.
At some point?
I mean, you do have to make some sort of sacrifices, and a lot of it is sort of lost on the audience, and it's certainly lost on the front of house guy, because some of it is really, it's how it feels to play it, which you can't really translate to anyone else but you.
Right.
Which, again, when we switched a couple things and I said what it felt like to play it, that it was fun to play, the experience of playing this, I can't really translate what it feels like to do that, but that felt real. Right. Just being able to push into it and having it respond.
Right. Now, do you also do in-ears a lot of times?
I do. With John's gig, I do.
And do you have any issues with what comes in the ears and the separation of pushing air, which is another consideration?
What's a word that's bigger than issues?
No,
I don't like them at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is for places like the Sphere where that is the only way to
Right.
play that venue, how do you get this, which you're getting a sound that sounds to me like an amp in the room and it's going to verge of exploding, but it's dynamic. And then sometimes you lose that in the in-air experience.
100%.
Which is, again, why some drummers have like those butt kickers, things where you can feel like something's moving.
Right.
But I think us as guitar players, if we're not pushing a little air, it does feel a little disconnected.
Yes.
And again, you being the singer, again, you want to hear a guitar, but you also got to sing over that.
Right.
And you're also supporting other singers who want you to do the right thing, but also, if you're not having any fun, then that's not great either.
Exactly.
So let's dive in a little bit more. Let's go to your amp tone, and let's try a couple of things, because I'd be curious, because we got to your sound pretty quick, which makes me feel like also I think you adapt really well to what's in front of you.
True.
Again, you know how to get right to the stuff. So let's go ahead and turn off the reverb here. And one interesting experiment, which we haven't gone through, is there another speaker that actually speaks better with the amp?
Okay.
Because right now we're using a sort of a greenback 25-watt speaker. And let's just see of a few other ones what you like and dislike. Because I'm curious now what works and what doesn't. So let me do that. And then we're going to play with the amp type.
Okay.
So in fact, you know what? I'll leave the reverb on. And let's get you back up and running. All right, so you should have some volume there. Okay, that's off at the moment. So right now, again, these are sort of a good mid-level, little warm, not too bright Celestians. D65 Celestians.
Not a fan of those.
Next one. you know, interesting enough, they're all subtle shades, but the high end shifts around. And that comes, we were moving from like EVs to JBLs to vintage 30s. And then you can hear a 412 being really bottom heavy. And then times you hear the JBL, which is like a D1, which is very that Jerry Garcia super clean hi-fi thing. But the amp's dirty, so sometimes that dirt going through too hi-fi of a speaker actually kind of works against you.
Right.
And it just gets fizzy.
Right.
So there's a thing with what you're doing that is you have clarity in your playing and the amp choice, and the speaker has to kind of massage a little bit of that dirt, but also not be so dark that it turns to mud.
Right.
And there was one or two, and I could just hear like, just feel like, nah,
Right.
just
Right.
keep going.
Right. Right.
And that's okay. And this also becomes more of a color palette, especially if you're tracking something, because not everything can have the same tone either. So maybe you want a tone that's narrow over here.
Right.
You know, or you want the solo tone. So I always have to tell people, like, maybe you don't like that right now, but there's going to be a time when you need a different color palette.
Right.
And that's why a lot of these are in there. So funny enough, I always go right back to the very top, just straight up sort of greenback Celestion sound. It has highs, it's not too boomy.
Yeah.
And the mid range is here enough, but not too
Yeah.
in your face. Now I got one more experiment for you. I want to set you up with the 50 watt, which
Okay.
I think might have been too hi-fi for you because it's got a little extra high end. So we're in, again, the 100 watt low plate. Now the high plate 50's got a lot of high, so I'll switch you over now. So there you go.
Where am I now?
It's funny, I think the biggest thing for you was the 50 watt and that first 100 watt low plate.
Yeah.
So in your feeling, because the 50 watt has a little extra sizzle on the top, but it depends on whether you like that or not.
I do.
So this might have been a little cleaner for you. So I'll switch you back between the 50 high plate and that very first 100 watt low plate. So 50.
Oh man, they're all so good.
But this one definitely got a little smoother on
Yeah,
your
it did.
playing. I lost a little bit of your fingers in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it depends what you want to hear though.
Well, it just depends on the song, because I have some songs that are like, you know, really kind of sort of ethereal, almost kind of like Jeff Buckley, or, you know, maybe like sort of in the kind of Coldplay realm. And then I have other songs that live like in the almost a Keith Richards-y, Stones-y, kind of Black Crowes-y thing, where I need to kind of lean into it and have it kind of speak that way. So it just depends. And I mean, you know, not to blow smoke, but I'm thinking about the first sort of Kidney Line 6 things, which, you know, we've all kind of fooled ourselves into thinking that sounded like an amp, and it didn't feel like an amp at all. And, you know, I guess is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get better and better at it and better and better at it. You know, I feel like this is even like light years better than the Dream or some of the ones that you guys have made. Like this one speaks to me more than any of the ones that I played before. This feels like the most in step with the way that I play. It's kind of got like a bounce to it, like the notes come back to me.
You went somewhere very important. That it's funny you referenced Dream, because there's no doubt that the Overdrive Special came out of that man's love of Fender circuits.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really tear apart those amps, they have a lot in common with those Fender circuits.
Right.
And I came from a Fender background. In fact, I'm actually sitting next to the first Fender I ever got, which was all of $25 when I was a teenager.
Oh, you kept
This is one right here.
That's amazing.
That I actually went to Mark Sampson and got his matchless capacitors
That's
when he
crazy.
first opened his shop. So I replaced it with matchless caps. Funny
That's
you said
awesome.
Mark Sampson. But that's just I'm old because I remember a long time ago. But funny that's what's back there. But when I had this, and then when I started playing Overdrive Specials a long time ago, it made sense. I'm like, oh, I can get used to this because it's almost like a better Fender.
Right.
Like somebody knew what a Fender needed to really hone in on what I was trying to get out. And
It's
then
got the soul of it. And
the
then-
solo, yeah.
yeah.
But there was things you could push things to go, well, but I play like this.
Right.
And I feel like when we get to these kinds of circuits, I could tell you immediately like knew what to do with it because I could tell your amp history. The fact that you run a super reverb makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
And then you're playing and what you wanted to dial in. But the thing is, these amps seem really complicated. And you know, granted, when you get the app, you see all of these choices, but there's no right or wrong answer.
I mean, when we were trying to dial in tones when we first got here, you were going through stuff, and I was like, I don't know what to tell you, James. They all sound great, and they don't all sound the same. They all sound different, but they all sound really good. And even when you were flipping through the speakers, I was like, man, I feel like I would just put it in one place and just break the knob off because I would just have option paralysis. They all sound really good. But it you know, in the overdub situation, it is great to have complementary tones. With, you know, slightly different speakers and stuff. So I'm pumped to get my Enigmatic.
Yeah, no, I'm into it. And I think what happens is you spend a little bit of time on this, and then you just kind of, again, I could tell you technically what all these things are doing, and I've been through enough of the real ones and ones I didn't like, ones that I liked, and then you figure out, well, why didn't I like that one? It was too stiff, it didn't give enough, or it was too brittle, or I mean, I was in the wrong speaker. I feel like this is, unlike the Dream is really easy. You just turn up the volume.
Yeah.
It kind of is what it is. Just like a great deluxe or a great super, you turn it up. But then after a while, as you grow and you look for other tones that maybe are your own,
Right.
you need a few more colors in that palette to go, well, maybe I need to go this way. And it's okay to veer off because I think all of us have heroes we want to sound like.
Right.
You know, I bought this fuzz face because I thought Axis Bold as Love was the best fuzz lead sound ever.
Right.
I chased the Marshalls and the fuzzes, and then you hear, you know, Eric Johnson, or you hear Stevie Ray, or you hear Larry Carlton, and you chase that rabbit for a while. Then you realize some of these guys all had the same amp, and they all sounded different.
Right.
And it was my fault for not adapting and figuring that out. And when I hear you play the same pedal that Tim Pierce just played, completely different.
Yeah.
And when Joey's going to play it, it's going to sound completely different.
Yeah.
And you might even be on the same settings.
Right.
And again, I love the Dream pedal, again, and it works perfectly, but there's sometimes you just know you need to go somewhere else. And, you know, maybe having 3 bright craps is over the top, but it does something.
For sure.
You know, so I'm happy that we can do this, and I want to have some more fun with hitting the amp, because the one thing is, again, we're running everything into the front, and out the amp, we're essentially like going to front of house is what it would sound like. So can you explain to me, again, spring reverb, some kind of fuzz, boost, and then trem, is that pretty much where your safe zone is, or is there anything else we're missing?
For my solo stuff, it would be that, you know, maybe a vibrato in place of the trim, but that's I could play a show with that for sure.
Well, David, I think talking about music sometimes sucks because you're here and you can actually use this sound in context with one of your songs. So if you don't mind, I'd love to hear how this works for you.
I'd love to play one for you.
Awesome. So I'm gonna hang back here and watch it.
All right. Don't make it weird.
Yeah. Too late.
Don't know why she deals with her conscience. Know what she's slowly killing a man. Bottle's got my fingerprints on it. Still got my blood on her hands and her heat. Even if she don't know it, she is the reason I'm here, looking for the stronger stuff. Bartender, fill my cup. So I keep hope alive and keep the fire going inside. Well, I'm sipping this kerosene until she comes back to me. Yeah, we had a love like a candle, but I blew out the flame. I can be a hard one to handle, idiot when there's a hurricane, baby. But even if she don't know it, she is the reason I'll be right here till closing time. drinking and until I'm blind. As I keep hope alive, keep the fire going inside. I'm sipping this kerosene until she comes back to me. It burned my tongue a little at first, but the heartbreak that I feel is worse. And now it's my favorite drink. The poison tastes good to me. So won't you, bartender, please pour me another kerosene.
David, thank you for being here. And the scratchy pot thing, it was a nice touch. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks. Joey Landreth, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for hanging out last note forever. It felt like you're...
Hey, you know, I'm happy to be that guy who gets the last word.
It's literally this whole day.
Yeah.
And this is great because I think what we're going to talk about is some classic tones that were started on Overdrive Specials, and especially why you picked that 1176 pedal in front, which let's just go for it. Why is it there?
It's there because Lowell George is one of my ultimate heroes, and he's known for using these circuits, the Overdrive Special circuit, and he always used two compressors in front of them. So I just kind of, I personally don't use compressors a whole lot in my own playing, except for when I'm kind of trying to invoke that Lowell George spirit. But I just thought it would be cool to try to represent that sound a little bit and have folks hear what that does.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And as it seems like, since you don't use them, I'm assuming your amp is gainy enough to where if you want sustain, you could probably roll the volume up to keep a note hanging there.
Yeah, I mean, I always have a compressor on my board, and I very rarely step on it. But when I do step on it, it's when I want that like infinite kind of sustain thing. But it's sort of my main setting on an amp is as gainy as it sort of needs to be before I hit it with something like a fuzz. So it tends to be fairly gainy, and then I clean it up with a volume pot.
Perfect. So maybe we should just dig into that. So we'll have the compressor off for now, and let's just get a feel for what your basic needs are, what the amp has to do to play slide. Because I'll be honest with you, a slide on a dead clean amp is not a whole lot of fun. There's not a lot of bloom, things just kind of die. But then if it's too distorted, then you lose the character of the slide and things get weird. So I think you're gonna help me figure out why this works, and I think your playing is gonna hopefully work with the setting we come up with. So let's just dig in. So we have a general setting now, and you've got a lot of experience with overdrive circuits, these overdrive special kind of things. So I'm assuming where we started is your starting point. Like, are you always in the rock mode? Is there no deep, no mid range? Is it the power section high? Like where would you dial in to start? Like,
Night after night, it changes. So I'm kind of like, I start at high noon with everything except for the master. And then the EQ switches are disengaged. Okay. And then depending on what the room is doing, I'll change. Like the deep switch, I think, changes the resonant peak of where the low end is. So it actually kind of helps clean up the bottom end, which is most often the biggest problem that I have in a room is too much low end. It sounds great and feels great when I'm playing by myself, but as soon as the band is in, it makes front house's life very difficult. So try to dial back the bottom as much as I can, and being able to control those frequencies is really, really helpful. But yeah, I usually start high noon and just kind of like, figure out where things need to be for that night based on what the room is doing.
Well, let's go for that, which is kind of sort of where we're at now. Yeah. Again, I think our volume's kind of at noon, and the tone controls, again, they're not pushed very hard, So like if we'll just try it. We'll go straight up noons.
Come on, let's be brave.
You want to push it a little harder?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So just so we hear what this sounds like, that's pretty much noon setting and no compressor. So I can already hear we're hitting the amp a little hard. So when you hit it a bit harder, I did hear a little bit of gain and a little bit of sort of smooth overdrive. So we can play with, now how high is your master typically on when you're on stage?
I mean, live through a live amp, it's generally pretty low. You know, being a singer, my stage volume, I just over the years of doing what I do, as much fun as it is to be loud, it just makes me, you know, I have to sing louder, blow my voice out, harder to get into the wedge. So I just trust my front house guys making it slam out front. And I usually keep my master fairly low. So I don't, when I'm using my live rig, I don't get into power amp saturation very much.
Okay.
Which is one thing that I'm really enjoying in the Enigmatic is you can dial that in.
Dialing in. So let's try dialing in. So we're at this noon setting. We do have the bright switch on at the moment, a little bit down the middle. And so I'll pull this back. So this would be a fairly clean power section at this point. And then let's go ahead and get that up to about noon. So the Pro Tools will do a little something for us there.
Yeah.
Is that going the right? It's going. So that's a going the right way thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
you give me a little more of that, I think.
Okay, so let's give that. We'll give it a little bit more.
Yeah, I quite like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're at a point where you are fairly overdriven when you're hitting this thing really hard. So are you keeping the volume down, riding the whole time?
Yeah, so yeah.
That's one thing that sometimes is hard to see. Like, well, is the amp dirty? Like, what's going on? And I think it's in that same like a Jeff Beck thing. You could watch Jeff Beck do this, but you're like, well, what's going on here? And things, tones are coming down, volume's moving, and it becomes you're very smooth at it. So I don't know what's happening. Like, but you're doing a lot with your right hand to get the amp to do what you want. And
Yeah.
And I'm assuming when you do get to the fuzz, it's a very like purpose. Like now the fuzz is on, now the overdrive's hitting.
Yeah.
If you're doing a lot of work with the right hand, that seems really easy for you.
Yeah, it's just something that's developed over time, and yeah, but I'm always changing things. The tone knob, too, is a big part.
Oh, that's great, because your tone control is a value where it starts to get a little mid-range honk to it too.
Yeah.
It's not just going in the mud, which is very interesting, the value you picked to do that.
Yeah, I've messed around with the value of the tone pot quite a bit. I think it's 0.03 in there right now. So it's like a little more than you would have in a humbucker sort of situation, but anyway.
No, that's good. That's good, because these are things that if your amp can do these kinds of dynamics, it makes it more important that what's going on here, it's actually doing what you want, because it'll track through the amp, which is, again, we'll probably pull out a fuzz later, since you mentioned fuzz and using other things like that. That this amp originally, circuit-wise, was very Fendery, but also the gain stages were layered in such a way that there's a push and pull between how you set things up. And the biggest push and pull is your hands and how hard you're hitting things, and where your tone is and where your volume is, and then are you hitting it with a little booster, or in our case, the compressor. So we're not compressed yet. Maybe it's worth talking about for 2 seconds why we chose this 11/7/6 And there's a setting on here that actually is the Lowell George setup, which is 2 clean 1176s in a very high compression setting. So when we turn this on, we're not looking for distortion sustain, but the clean sustain. So we heard your sound now, so let's engage this and just see how the compressor changes that.
As long as you want it to, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An interesting thing that we're doing here, if you hear closely how the amp is fading out, because the masters, I actually hear the power transformer kind of squeezing a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is what the real amps do when they're that high.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that makes us feel like we're in an amp that's not dying, but is all those layers are moving around.
Everything's working.
Yeah. And setting that up is worth the investment in time because your playing style kind of demands that the amp track you that well. I'm sure, I mean, not that you wouldn't sound great in front of a dual rectifier with a lot of gain, but
I don't know.
I don't know, but so let's dig in a little further. So we've got our master gain up pretty high. Mm-hmm. Now we'll kill this for a second. Now the one thing we started off with is this basic amp. I'm gonna go from the top. So we're at the high plate, 100 watt, sort of stiff. Is there any reason you would want the amp to feel squishier or tighter?
Oh, totally. I mean, yeah. I mean, I probably, before I started messing around with the pedal, I probably would have assumed that I would like something squishier.
Right.
So.
Well, let's A/B that. So we're down the middle here. So let's go one step back. We're in a high plate now. Let's go to low plate with a little more squish to it. And we'll just go to the far end there. So we're going to go to the very stiff power supply and set up here.
I don't know which one I like better.
Now, oddly enough, I think from the listening perspective, they sound similar, but I know when I do it, I play differently on the two.
For sure.
And is one of those feel more at home, or is I think you're obviously playing great either one, but which one's going to make you not think about it, not have to worry?
Probably maybe the stiffer setting, I think.
Wow.
Because I mean, it just depends. Like the something that's got a little more sag kind of makes me get more into like what the harmonics are kind of doing. And I probably would find myself just like playing. I'd probably be focusing more on that than actually playing. Right. I mean, it's just my gut. But I don't know. It's hard to choose because I like them all.
Well, that's good. And I think also we'll go back again. Let's go to a 50 watt.
Okay.
Which in this 50 actually is a little more trebly as well. So here's your high plate 50.
Also very great.
I'm going to pick one for you.
Pick one for me.
I felt like you were kind of, the low plate and the very stiff one seemed like it might have held together better for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you do quite a bit of chording in between stuff, and the chords here actually were kind of staying put and not kind of collapsing either.
Yeah, I think like it's what I like about using fuzz pedals is they kind of get you to that collapsing state where there's not that same kind of stability. You get a lot more sort of harmonic overtone stuff happening, which can make playing chords, challenging.
Yeah.
But I do like that sound. So that's probably why I'm having a hard time picking is because depending on what I'm going for, I would go for something that's got a lot of sag and squish, like a fuzz face that's kind of like dimed or whatever. But
Which we're gonna do.
Which we're gonna do.
Still gonna do. But I will say that I in some of your playing, I do see a 13th flat 9 every once in a while. And that stuff's not so great when it's all fuzzed out.
Yeah.
And being able to get that harmony that's kind of these close interval things and not have it completely sound like crap. Because the problem is there are too many harmonics. That's why when there's so much distortion, chords just sound terrible. So getting the clarity to when you do play a little bit more of a complex harmony chord, that it rings and is beautiful, but then still your soloing tone is still there. And I hear a lot of that in your playing. And actually, no matter what you're playing, it seems that you're able to mix chord harmony, melodies in there with single note stuff. And that can be quite difficult to do for one person. Because typically that's two people.
Yeah, right.
I think the minute you start pulling things get squirrelier.
Yeah.
And I've seen you do this, certain songs where you're able to put some of that stuff in there and you're not so distorted to lose that.
Yeah.
Now, also another thing is where you're putting your time-based reverb delay things. And right now we're doing things after. Is that a typical choice for you, or do you like putting a slap in front and letting it crash?
It depends on a lot of things. Like in the studio, I almost always run my wet effects after the amp. I like the way it sounds for the wet effects to be hearing what the amp is doing. And if I'm set up for it, I do like for it to be post-speaker. Not necessarily just in like an effects loop. A lot of times in the studio, you crank things up more than you would live. So the power amp is doing more, and so I feel like just an effects loop doesn't quite tell the whole story. So I don't know why I like that. I think maybe I just read one of my favorite guitar players did that, and then I started doing that. But I do like things going into the front of the amp. It kind of just depends on how much time I have to get set up, and so I mean. Yeah, so it's not necessarily like an all-the-time preference. Nowadays, I'm running a much simpler rig, so all my effects are going into the front of the amp.
Oh, okay.
But in the past, I've run wet, dry, wet, where, and again, it's a lot of fun, but it's when you don't have a guitar tech, it's a whole lot of setup and a whole lot of troubleshooting.
Yeah. And a whole lot of talking in front of house and how to blend that.
Yeah.
You got your dry here and you've got wet, and that can go south if somebody out front's not blending that correctly.
Yeah. And a lot of times you're hearing things differently than they're hearing things. So, where it sounds balanced and blended from where I'm standing is going to be different than, 100 feet out in front, or in my case, 10 feet out in front.
Well,
yeah.
And this was a discussion I've had with certain players, like, man, how do you just play a Marshall with nothing? And you realize those guys were playing like the Royal Albert Hall, and the room had reverb.
Yeah.
And you hear this, and you because there's a certain comfort to the room.
Yeah.
And so I always feel like it's okay to have a little reverb, because that is a space you're in, which is probably one of the reasons we put room in there, just to have a little reflection.
Yeah,
in
which
there.
I love, and the whatever the algorithm is being run is really nice and believable.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not big, it's not small, but it is a decent guitar. Well, we set it up at our studio, so it's one of these rooms that was tuned for a guitar to have a few reflections, but not feel like it was reverb and not get in the way, which my reference for this, just so as we're talking about it, was actually the Axis Bulges Love Hendrix sessions.
Cool.
Where it's like he's dry, but there's an ambience to it because the drum mics were picking up his Marshall from 20 feet away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that little bit of diffusion through the room and getting to that just gave it a depth.
Like my favorite guitar sounds always have a little bit. There's a great Jimmy Vaughn record called Out There, and his guitar sound on that record is like, I'm always trying to get my guitar to sound like that.
Yeah.
A little bit of room in there.
A little bit of room, or
Yeah.
I love Jimmy, but that guy can use nothing, guitar straight to a matchless amp typically.
Yeah.
That's even more scary when you realize that's very naked. You're laying it all out there.
Oh yeah.
And Jimmy's
There's nowhere to hide.
There's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way about slide, because you don't even have frets to hold your tune to hide under that either.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, one wrong turn and you're out of tune.
Yeah.
So you're holding this down while holding this down, and the amp's got to do the right thing. So I don't even know how you're still standing here after trying to play slide, you know.
Yeah, I'm a genius. Just kidding.
I didn't want to say it. I'm glad you did.
Not a lot of people know this about me, but I'm super smart.
Yeah, you're
Just kidding.
Well, we'll go into the super smart stuff, because honestly, I think the thing about this is, one thing we do, again, there's no wrong answer. So I want to play with your lead sound a little bit, because you did talk about using some boost pedals, but let's go ahead and use the ODS Overdrive and see if we can tune this into something that's usable for you.
Great.
Because the amp's obviously pretty hot already.
Yeah.
But let's just see how bad I can make this.
Great.
So we're going to turn it on. The pedal is in a mode where we have that switchable here. So by turning this, we've got the ODS enabled. So
Cool.
right now we're not doing HRM, so this would be equivalent to like that Lowell original head, where it was very mid forward and not a lot of bass.
Got you.
So just give that a try, and then we'll start playing. Now, we have the overdrive trim here, which would typically be buried in the amp, and that's how much you get from the front hitting that circuit. So do we need to push that back or more?
I don't know. What do you think?
Well,
I think it sounds pretty cool, but maybe we can bring back the master gain a little bit and let the preamp do a little more work.
Oh, good idea.
Feels good.
Okay, we're getting the good territory. Now, just for giggles here, we can turn on HRM. And I think depending on what you're going for, this is going to, just by turning it on even flat, it's definitely going to fill out stuff.
Okay.
Which again, you talked about earlier, being bass is your main issue when you're trying to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and enable it, and then we'll just see if that's going the wrong direction.
I mean, it feels pretty good.
Yeah. Okay, so we could take that, because it filled out a little bit of the missing bottom, and this is not any knock against those original Overdrive Specials, is if you do hear like the Lindley tones and some of that stuff, he definitely was mid-forward.
Yeah.
But he's also in a very large band where he's got Jim Jackson playing guitar, it might have been Korchmar playing another guitar, or Waddy, pianos. So I guess depending on what your situation is. So what I can do is I can push these mids forward again on the HRM and even pull back the bass just a hair, just to see. So I'm gonna pull this back a bit and then push your mids forward. So you're still gonna be big and full, but have a little bit more out.
That feels really nice.
It's getting there. Now I'll take it out. So without it, here's back where we were before.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like if I was playing on my own and like doing like something solo, I would probably leave the HRM in. But for band stuff, I'd probably keep it out just because it's not as exciting sounding, but it cuts a little bit more, and that's always what I'm kind of wind up leaning toward in a band situation.
Funny, immediately when we did the non-Atrum, I keep thinking, oh, but that would cut over a Rhodes or a drums and bass.
Yeah.
You would float right over that and have nothing in your way.
Yeah, I also tune low, which doesn't do you any favors for cutting through a band. So I'm always kind of trying to split the difference between. I don't know why I tune low. I started doing
it's
it.
cool for one thing.
Yeah, it's
cool,
cool,
yeah.
but it's a pain for everything else. Yeah, so I'm always trying to get things to cut a little bit more.
I did notice your fullness of your low end. That's where I heard it. When the minute you hit the low stuff, like, oh, it's nice, a nice pillow.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But as I'm sure as you've experienced recording your band, that if you're the biggest thing and then the bass is the biggest thing and then the kick drum's the biggest thing, everybody loses.
Well, the problem is
You
my
know?
brother plays the bass, and he just gets mad at me, like, quit cutting my grass kind of thing. So, so I have to dump the bottom end for him.
Just to save the family.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
But it definitely is a thing, and I think as you record and you learn your tone, it is interesting when you're by yourself. Things that work out and sound huge typically fall apart in a band setting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I think, as these Overdrive Special Amps were refined, he kept getting feedback from players who were working in sessions and touring. So you were thinking, well, that's a weird honky sound, but you're like, oh, but I know why that's there.
Yeah. When the band's up and running, you can hear it.
You can hear it.
Yeah.
And we talked about a few players earlier, like a Jimmy Vaughn type, or even someone, some of these, even the Lindley sound, or even Lowell George. Again, he had to sound that way, play slide and stick out amongst that band that had percussion guy, drum guy,
Yeah.
keyboard guy was super busy,
Yeah.
and the other guitar player.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how you can craft something that is unique, and it sounds huge, but frequency response wise really isn't.
Yeah.
You sound huge on your low strings because you're tuned down there, and I can hear the string gauge being a little bigger, and it sounds huge, but you don't sound like you're getting lost. So I know I'm talking about music, which sucks, and talking about tone, which sucks, but it helps me to figure out why you're doing the things you're doing.
Yeah.
So that's it. So right now, funny, I'm going to leave that off. So one other thing is, can we go back and forth? Like, when would you engage that overdrive? Like, again, so now we can just turn it off and on. So let's reference your clean sound again.
I mean, that sounds great.
Yeah, but then we'll get this, which you should still be able to get it clean rolled down, but
Yeah.
then the transition. I've never seen anyone gent with the slide. So you might be the first.
And you'll
but
never see it again.
Again.
You never should.
burn that footage. So one of the things, again, I notice about your playing is we don't have a big pedal board right now. And right now, we're literally just using the amp. So the fact that there's a whole dance going on with the pickup, the tone control, the volume control, playing harder, lighter, this kind of writing your dynamics, there's a lot more going on because you're able to do more with less. And again, it comes back to that thing where how do you get what you want out of this stuff without thinking about it? And I don't, hopefully you get to a point where you're not thinking about this anymore. Because I notice you're at the point now on your guitar, but is that doing the right thing?
The way that I came up as like kind of a for hire guy in the Winnipeg scene, there wasn't like you wound up having to use everything from like the first amp that I had was a PV stereo chorus. Not a good sounding amplifier. We have to figure out how to. Like, I mean, it depends on the sounds you're going for. The stereo chorus, I don't think it can be beat. But the distortion sound on it was pretty gnarly, and not in the good way. But you just kind of have to figure out how to get a sound out of anything that you're plugging into. And sometimes you're plugging into things that aren't going to give you much back. And sometimes you're plugged into something that's going to respond to your every single touch. And that makes it harder to dial in, like innately. The first time I played a real ODS, it took almost an hour to dial in a sound. And it was quite hard. And was like, at first I plugged into it and was like, oh man, am I going nuts? Like, or does this thing actually sound bad? But once I figured out like how everything was interacting, then it was like unbelievably responsive, and it was really, really special. But I think you do that enough times, and you start to kind of understand how something interacts with the way you play, and that's why I'm always adjusting things, because trying to just get it to feel a certain way and sound a certain way.
My first amp was a PV2 Sonoma filter pad. It wasn't even the nice one. It was a Backstage 20.
Ooh, damn.
Yeah, damn. so trying to sound like the Police on a Backstage 20 was not happening. I didn't know what compression, I had no chorus, so you were already one step ahead of me with the chorus. And then I would out myself even more. So there was a Dumble I used for a while in the early 90s, and I sent a note back to the guy, the man, saying, I don't like this. My strat sounds terrible.
Yeah.
It was razor bladey and terrible and too much. And he was like, it's got Skyline, you got to open the amp, there's trimmers.
Yeah.
What we're doing, the whole reason this has ended up in there, because I just remember being scarred from that, getting a fax note that said, it has Skyline, there are trimmers inside, you have to tailor it. And he was in LA, I was in the Bay Area at the time.
And that's when I first heard you guys were doing this, because I am such a fan of the sound, not only having played the ones that I've played, I've never owned one, of course, but played the ones that I've played, and a lot of my heroes played them. I feel pretty intimate with that sound, and I've tried so many of the sort of D-style emulators, and they all, it's like, oh, this is a touch sensitive, high saturation, and they all do it, but there's, I don't know, there's just a lot missing from them. There's like not necessarily a love for what they actually did, and I think a lot of people don't understand like how intense the tone controls are, and how deep you can EQ those things, and they're not just like mid-rangey saxophone tone all the time. And so I just think you guys have done such a good job with this, and in that like you can really tailor every part of it. And also, I've probably played like 7 or 8 real ODSs, and I've only loved 1 or 2, and plugged into them and just been like, ooh, this one's not for me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so anyway.
Being able to pull this up for me was, a guilty pleasure, because I want this for me too.
Yeah, well, you can tell.
Yeah, I like it, and it's, and all the guys we did on our team doing this, especially Ross, who did this with me, we were both into it, where we love tone and we love all the fine tuning. So hopefully someone feels like they're able to tailor it, But one other thing is, all of my heroes did have stuff in front of these, especially fuzz faces once in a while.
Yeah.
So I think we should break open a fuzz, and then maybe you can play us something cool on the way out of here.
Sure.
Awesome.
Let's get fuzzy, baby.
All right. So let's talk about the front end gain staging outside of the amp. So right now we have the compressor. We also threw in a fuzz, but we'll start with internal. So we'll hear the overdrive internal, then we'll kill that, hear compression sustain, and then hear fuzz sustain.
Sounds good.
Because I say one thing is the ODSs and all these amps were supposedly legendary for taking pedals great.
Yeah.
And I just like fuzz, so I'm being selfish. So we'll try it.
Okay.
So internal distortion. Awesome. So now we're going to do sustain with compression in front. Interesting. The notes are hanging as long, but it's not distortion from that, like the mid-range honk.
Yeah.
So now let's just go fully to the dark side and do the fuzz as sustain. Yeah, all right.
That's a good one.
That's awesome. Well, Joey, thank you for being here. And if you don't mind, we can just play us out.
Yeah.
'Cause, I love your voice. I love your playing. And sorry, you got to follow David, dude, because he was killing it. Come on.
I know, it's a drag.
This is just as great for me. I just get to watch. So
Cool.
thank you for being here. Let's play it out, dude.
Okay.
You say that it's over, that you're moving on. Song in your head keeps playing on and on. This bittersweet melody calls you back again. But somehow you always forget. You always end up crying, chasing a love that's dying. You always end up on your own, lied to and alone. You always end up crying.
Welcome here. We've got David, Joey, and Tim here. And I don't think you three have ever played together, right?
No.
We've never met.
Never met. But wow, okay, this is the
Yeah,
first
it's true.
time.
First time.
Okay.
Been a nice day.
And wonderful day and getting to know your playing in person and your tones and your story. It's been a real privilege for me to do this. And to get to see how this is all going to mash together is going to be even more fun, which is why I opted out for no electricity on my side. I'm going to be the strummer here. But it'd be interesting to see, as we went throughout the day and we were doing this, were there any tonal playing discoveries you guys had when no one was listening? Because I think when players get together, you always ask, like, man, what guitar is that? Well, what amp do you play? And I think you might end up loaning an amp to him, and you guys were checking out other guitars, and we're talking about tone controls and stuff. And, like, what was the general sense today? Did we all end up somewhere fun, tonally and playing-wise? And if anyone wants to take that.
Well, for me, it's touch sensitivity, which this provides. I can pick soft and get it clean, and pick hard and get it dirty. And then there are little levels in between. And I saw both you guys do that too in your own way. And certainly with the fingers, it has a whole different level of touch sensitivity. I like getting the device on one setting and being able to use my hands to do all the colors. To use it's a lofty word. All the different shadings of clean and dirty, and bright and dark and distorted, not distorted.
Now, I'm going to take that since you did go first today. The interesting thing is, I'm pretty sure none of you talked about this before, but you all had a very similar way of saying, I need dynamics, I need to be clean, I need to be dirty when I need it, I need to get away. For you two, it was more getting out of the way of a vocal or serving the song and being able to play. Well, you're also serving the song, but you're not the vocalist, but you're even in a more weird spot where you're probably getting tracks that have a bunch of stuff on it, and you're trying to fit in a space with a lot of famous singers and stuff, where you guys are also, in your cases, writing, playing, singing us all at once. So I think you all had the same goal in dynamics and musicality. But so for you, that's your whole thing too, because you're typically in a scenario where you don't have a lot of experience. You're not in a 9-piece band, let's put it that way. So you're carrying the meat of the harmony in your band, and you're singing. So that's a lot of pressure. And I think in talking to Dave, like, you did Hotel Cafe by yourself, rolled up and just played. That's like the scariest thing ever.
It's now it's second nature. Playing in a large ensemble is actually scarier for me now, because I don't have control. Like, I can, if I need to get quiet, I can get, when I'm by myself, I can get quiet. So that actually feels more comfortable to me, because I can't control the other 8 people.
True.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I like playing in smaller bands. Like, my favorite format is probably trio. And if there's a 4th person, they have to have big ears and be ready to get quiet when you need them to get quiet. But yeah, I think I would just echo all that stuff. This is what I think really impresses me and impressed me about the Enigmatic when I first got it was I pretty much immediately forgot that I was not playing through, an all-tube analog amp. And I think back to the sort of first offerings of digital amp modelers. I've never played one that sounds bad, but I have yet to play one that feels right. And this not only sounds the way it should, but it feels really, really good too. And in that touch, that's the thing that's missing is like when you change your touch, you get it back, so. But I just also had a really fun day listening to these two guys who I'm a huge fan of both.
Yeah.
It was great.
So that was pretty cool.
And what you're saying, that the touch thing, part of that is it's difficult to explain that to the listener, but as a player, you can feel it, and I think it makes you play differently.
Yeah.
You're really good at doing the volume rides. I'm terrible at it. So the fact that I can, just with my playing dynamics, get the clean and the dirty, like I'm singing, I don't have to think about playing softly. It just sort of comes naturally, because if I'm singing a soft part, then I play.
You just lighten your right hand.
Yeah, exactly. And you get all of that.
I want it to wake up when I pick harder.
Yeah.
Kind of go back to sleep when I pick soft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does that.
Yeah.
It does that.
So how did you get it to do that?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the simple answer actually is it's mostly because once you get in there, all of the little pieces really do talk to each other. So it's the same way where you might have an amp and go, well, I want more bass, so you might change a capacitor, or you might change a tube. This is quite literally the same thing. All of that is in there. There's no fakery going on. We literally listen to, oh man, can you change the bright cap? I don't like that.
Yeah.
And let's rebias the power section. I also don't like those tubes, and let's change the gain. It's all the stuff we would do in hardware. And it's funny, we've talked about it. It would have been so much easier if I just made the amp from scratch myself with Mraz. It's so much easier just to build the damn thing
Yeah.
than it is to go, well, if I put a tube into this wire, into this thing, that sounds like that, but there are things that aren't on the schematic. And that's what we call, well, not to get too crazy about it, but the placement of things, the capacitance of the cable, the quality of the cable that connects things to this. All of that little value. Some may say this is the value of the cap, but it's not really if you measure it.
Right.
And that's why some people are like, well, I like a tube screamer, but I have 4 of them. This one sounds amazing, because it might have deviated just a bit or been used a little bit. And that's why a lot of times we have to listen to multiple amps, multiple golden references, and then just go, well, but why does it sound, why is this one different? And you realize, like, oh, there's a mistake, actually. That's the wrong value in there.
Sure.
And it's like, well, what would you do? Well, there are a lot of things that just take a sonic picture of things. We have to be circuit for circuit, piece for piece wise. So if you were to talk to me or Ross and go, well, what was your favorite one? Like, well, I like the one that had a .047 over here, and I like the way it split, and that one was a little darker, and it's literally the same stuff. So for me, it's very natural from like when I used to open my own amps and fix them myself, because I didn't have the money to pay someone to fix it. And you're like, this is how you solder something. And they go, oh, there's a mod. You can put this wire here and change this. You do the same. We do the same thing there. So if you do this right, the way you roll your volume down is a volume change and right, and the amp will respond differently. The way you play softer would be a volume. The way you hit the attack, the recovery rate of these things. If you were to just do, if this just matched this EQ of an amp, it would sound right, but it wouldn't feel right. So it's like, well, with the knob settings, you move on. Well, no, the biggest knob you turn is your hands and your guitar. Because if it's this volume when you play, does it really sound like the real thing here? And when you play harder, does it really sound like the real thing? It has to scale. Mm-hmm. Each knob, each tube, each piece has to do the exact same thing as the real thing. And that's why it takes us a long time to do one.
Yeah. I feel like, I said this when we were chatting earlier, but when I opened up the app and looked at all the things that you chose to make accessible, like coupling cap size and bright caps, like that feels like just care and deep respect. You know what I mean? And it's not just a filter that you go, this is, a saturated mid-forward sound. It's like, it's very deep, so it's cool.
Yeah, and I think obviously you're in the room where a lot of that fine-tuning was done, so there's a reason why there's a bunch of wacky guitars in here and weird fuzzes and overdrives, and it has to do the same thing in the real world. So if I go grab that telly with that compressor and smack the amp, is it doing the same thing? Is it doing the same thing when I grab the L5 and get a super clean sound? And so that's also, when we get near the end of a project, I have to put it through its pace, and I will just play it. And you just have to make sure. There's days like, oh, wow, that's right. And it's like, it didn't do that one thing where it's not blooming. And then you scratch your head for 2 days. So I honestly say that it's a half split thing where there's the science involved, but then there's the actual human touch of it all. And sometimes we literally go, that's just more fun to play. I like that. And we call it.
Yeah, cool.
So until it becomes fun and playable and I stop thinking about it, which again, I think we all experience today, is at some point you get a sound, you're like, okay, I can play, so stop messing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And tape down the settings,
Yeah.
don't touch it.
Yeah, like what you said, break the knob off.
Yeah, break
the knob off.
Yeah.
Yeah, break the knob off and don't touch it. And hopefully we get to those points. And I loved how the three of you had the same common goal of dynamics and touch sensitivity, but some of you put the reverb in front, put the reverb in post. Let's put a compressor here. Let's put a fuzz here. And you all sounded like yourself, although you, oddly enough, all had a very similar sort of setup in the amp, but everybody sounded different. And I think that's one of the things that these Overdrive Special Amps did, was keep your character and keep your sort of identity going into the amp and somehow make it your own too. So, I mean, you all played to the same pedal, but I don't think any of you sounded alike at all. All brilliant in your own way. So,
Well, thanks for all the hours and all the days and all the minutes you put into this thing. Yeah, and like you said, I forgot that we were using a pedal. The whole time we were making our sounds, I thought, we're in an amp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could lose hours
yeah.
in that. It's great.
The whole point is just to put down all this stuff and play guitar and make music.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to just see you three play and me get to be the drummer. We actually have 3 Enigmatics plugged in. So we've got this board, we've got another one here, and then one that's, you've got the no reverb, just amp in the room.
I'm ready. You got a tune?
No, that's it. Yeah, now comes the hard
Put 'em on the
one.
spot.
Right.